So in terms of general background, over the past 25 years, I say past 25 years because this coincides with the end of the Cold War. I was a first-year undergraduate student when the Cold War ended, and I didn't know what impact that would have on my course. I was an undergraduate student at the London School of Economics, and I was taking a set course which was foreign policy analysis. Now, during this course of foreign policy analysis, I had worked to revise very hard for a examination question on Soviet foreign policy. So I thought that a question would come up, which would be, to what extent was the foreign policy of the Soviet Union influenced by Marxist-Leninism? And I worked very hard for that, but there was a problem. The problem was that over the summer, before the course, before the examination took place, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. So I thought, naturally, that because the Soviet Union ceases to exist, then we would not have an exam question on Soviet foreign policy. But guess what? We had the same exam question on Soviet foreign policy, and I had not prepared for it because there was still no Soviet Union. The reason I'm mentioning this is because foreign policy analysis was based on the analysis of the foreign policy of sovereign states. The assumption was that the Soviet Union would be a great power and an international actor from one year to the next. There was a sense of predictability about this. So this predictability underlines conventional understandings of security. So over the past 25 years, what we understand by security has changed. We can no longer take the conventional understandings of security for granted. This is the premise and the assumption upon which the course is based. So it's perfectly okay to go back to a national security paradigm, which I'll be outlining for you today. But at the same time, there's a greater sense of reflexivity, of awareness that there are different conceptions of security. And that is the main focus of the course, to introduce you to these different conceptions of security. and not to take our understandings of security for granted. So although the national security paradigm, which I will be outlining today, continues to dominate the theory and practice of international relations. So one point which I'd like to underline, particularly in the light of recent events, in the light of Trump's victory in the US presidential elections, in the light of the decision of Great Britain to leave the European Union, is that national security continues to dominate our understandings of security. This is particularly true within South Asia today, where we have the prevalence of a national security paradigm. However, although the national security paradigm continues to dominate, continues to influence our understandings of what security is, its hegemony within international relations has been eroded by the emergence of what can be termed non-traditional security threats and by the emergence of human security in particular. Now, there are a couple of conceptual issues which we need to clear up. The first conceptual issue here is the understanding of paradigm. Now, many of you may be familiar with the use of the term paradigm. We use paradigms all the time within social sciences. For those from more activist backgrounds, or those from humanities, from the arts, or from the natural sciences, may not be as familiar with the use of the term paradigm. So I think we need a brief exposition of the principal understandings of the nature of knowledge production within the social sciences. So up until the 1970s, particularly within the in the 1950s and 60s, particularly within the United States, but not exclusively within the United States, the dominant philosophy of knowledge, epistemology, or methodology within the social science was positivism. And positivism is still the dominant understanding of, or philosophy of knowledge, epistemology, within the social sciences and within international relations used today, particularly in the United States. So I'm not suggesting that we have thrown away positivism. We still live in a positivist universe. However, the assumption of positivism is that we could arrive methodologically at predictable outcomes through scientific research, through some sort of deductive knowledge production. One of the problems with this approach was that it was far more difficult to prove something to exist than to disprove it. So beginning in the 1950s and 60s, we had the work of Karl Popper in particular in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, and he posited the idea of falsification. Falsification meant that we should assume things to be true unless we disprove it. So the nature of scientific inquiry was to disprove a central hypothesis. Beforehand, under positivism, it was to verify it, to prove it to exist. Then it was to disprove it, falsification. Now, this state of affairs continued until the late 1960s and early 1970s, when we had the publication of a very important book by Thomas Kuhn, The Nature of Scientific Revolution. Now, Kuhn's great insight was that rather than thinking of knowledge production as this clear and steady progress towards a truth, a true statement, or a statement which, if we look at the Marxist approach, contained less contradictions than other statements, we still had these were still based on certain assumptions. So at the core of every theoretical statement, there are a series of assumptions. And what Kuhn argued is that you can't test those assumptions. These assumptions are unscientific. They are assumed. But these assumptions are important for us to construct knowledge. Now, Kuhn, through his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, opened up, therefore, the possibility of there being multiple truth claims, multiple knowledge claims existing at the same time. However, his argument was that in every discipline you would have one hegemonic paradigm. Hegemonic here is a word which I'm taking from the Italian Marxist historian Antonio Gramsci. So hegemony is similar to ideas of dominance. If you're familiar with Weber's understanding of social science, he has an understanding of dominance. Where hegemony, I think, has more theoretical purchase than dominance, is hegemony is based on the idea that it's not enough just to be dominated, you have to consent to this. You have to say, yes, I agree, it works. So it's not a passive, process of dominance. There's some agency involved. The agency is you consent to a particular intrusion upon you. So here, a hegemonic paradigm is a paradigm which continues to set the research agenda for a particular field of knowledge. We call this disciplines. So politics, I'm from political science. Political science is seen as a discipline. This discipline has a different focus than economics, which is another social science, different from anthropology, different from sociology. Now, what Kuhn argued was even within the discipline of political science, or even within the emerging discipline of international politics, because international relations or international politics never really existed as a separate discipline from political science until the publication of Kuhn's work, could we think of there being multiple paradigms competing within a different discipline? So within international relations, in the 1970s and the 1980s, the implications of Kuhn's research was to open up the possibility that there were multiple paradigms existing within international relations, but only one paradigm could set that research agenda. Now, within the great inter-paradigm debate of the 1980s, the realist paradigm, which I'll be introducing you today in the second lecture, set the agenda for international relations. And by setting the agenda of international relations, it influenced our understanding of security. So the argument upon which this course is based is that the assumptions upon which the national security paradigm are based have been challenged and contested within the post-Cold War era. And one way of articulating all the multiple, myriad different types of challenges is to use the term globalization. And I'll be introducing you to globalization tomorrow. So globalization can be seen as a multi-dimensional process which encompasses the idea of change or transformation at a global systemic level. Okay. Thanks. So I hope this was an understandable overview. We're not going to be looking at the philosophy of science again within the course, but I do think it's important for me to outline how I use certain terms. So you'll see the term paradigm and you'll see the term hegemony used within the course again and again. So these have precise meanings. In terms of an overview, this course seeks to critically evaluate some of the tensions which lie at the vital core of security. And again, if we look at this sentence, which is mainly a statement, almost a thesis statement for the course, I introduce at least three different conceptual ideas here. Firstly, the idea of critical, to be critical. I will ask you your understanding of critical later in the course when we look at critical perspectives on human security or critical security studies. So the idea here of being critical is not merely to criticize, but it really looks at the idea of questioning. And this is what makes this an advanced course. Rather than looking at an introductory course to human security or to security studies, which may be taught at an introductory level, in an undergraduate level, the idea here is to reflect upon it, to ask yourself whether you agree with it or whether you don't agree with it. And more importantly, if you don't agree with it, why do you not agree with it? You have to understand why you're reacting to a certain statement in a particular way. Is it based on the logic of that statement? Or is it based on the underlying assumptions upon which that statement is built? And I think that's very important. So this idea of being critical, it's reflexive. You're reflecting upon the theory, upon the knowledge claims, but you're also reflecting upon yourself, upon your own reaction to those knowledge claims. So to critically evaluate some of the tensions which lie at the vital core of security. So I've made my assumptions very clear. So the assumption here is that there are tensions right at the heart of our understanding of security. So I'm saying that all of these different understandings of security, which I'll introduce you to, are problematic. We don't have a holistic, theoretically coherent understanding of security. Therefore, we need to engage with security. We need to engage in different conceptions of security. Now, you may not agree with this assumption. If you don't agree with this assumption, that's perfectly fine. You can say, this is an assumption. Now I want to see throughout the course whether I can identify a theoretically coherent understanding of security. And if you do, then my assumption can be seen as an incorrect assumption. But this is part of the process of critically engaging with the work itself. I also use the term vital core. Now, vital core comes from one of the documents within your reader, this reader here, in the UNDP Human Development Report. In the Commission for Human Security Report. If it's not there, then it may be possible for me to circulate this much later, maybe tomorrow, by email. The final report of human security talked in terms of human security representing the vital core of security. And this again is an open question. What do we mean by vital core? The architect of the report, the person who wrote the report, Sabina Alkire, does not specify what she understands by the vital core. But the vital core permits us to feel secure. It is that which permits us to feel secure. So the argument here is that there are tensions here. There are tensions in our understanding of security which, irrespective of the world outside, the external world, the material world, there are tensions within the idea of security which make us feel insecure, which lead us to feelings of insecurity and anxiety. So this is another one of the assumptions upon which the course is based. Again, you may not agree with me. You may not feel insecure. You may feel that security is something to be taken for granted and it's something we can easily understand. But my argument here is that there is still much work to do within the field of security studies. Now, how do we do this? How do we seek to critically evaluate some of the tensions which lie at the vital core of security? Well, my argument is that and this is in line with most other methodologies in social science, is that we cannot seek to understand security only through the lens or only through the methodology of political theory. So political theory is to theorize something, to deductively come up with a particular model which enables us to explain a certain theory of an aspect of reality, a certain aspect of reality. So the argument which I would like to suggest, in common with many other approaches, is that we can't divorce the concept of security from people's lived experiences of security. We can't say security is this, security is X, if the principal cause of insecurity for most human beings is Y. We need to bring these into alignment. The only way we can do this is to look at empirical case studies of where insecurity exists. Now, one of the problems I have teaching about human security, and this is certainly asked in different parts of the world, is the assumption that people don't know what human security is, so they don't know what they're looking at. My main argument is it's much easier to define what insecurity is rather than security. So human security is that which is not insecurity. So in this sense, if we're going to look at empirical case studies, you should think about different sites of insecurity. These sites can be global sites of insecurity. We can look at environmental insecurity. We can look at global insecurity, terrorism, etc., poverty, malnourishment. And a global systemic level. We can look at a regional level. You can look at a national level, or you can look at a local level. They're all myriad cases of insecurity. Now, what I'm not going to do in this course is to talk about the empirical case studies. This is what I want you to do in your discussion. You're all coming from somewhere. So my assumption, and I'll make this even more explicit when we look at critical theories of human security and critical security studies, is that there is no view from nowhere. Thomas Nagel once mentioned this, the idea of a view from nowhere. Most theories of international relations, of social sciences, particularly within political theory, are posited on the idea of there being a view from nowhere, a universal view. My approach is that there may be a universal view. We don't know if there's a universal view or not. But the only way we can do it is by understanding what particular conceptions of universality there are. In other words, we can't derive at a universal definition of human security until we understand what people think of security. And only by engaging in a dialogue, understanding what security is, may there be a possibility of there being what Hans-Georg Gadamer talked in terms of a fusion of horizons, in which case we arrive at a universal conception of security. I don't know if this is possible, but I think certainly the case here is to introduce you to theory, and then when you're listening to these theories, when you have time for discussion, you should bring in your own local knowledge. You should bring in what you're working in and linking what you're working at to theories of security and reflect upon them. Which theory of security best fits your own security concerns as an individual, as a research scholar, as an activist. But this is not something I will be doing in class. I will not be giving you lots of empirical data, because if I give you lots of empirical data, it may not be your research interest. You're in a better position to bring in empirical case studies. I will introduce you to different theoretical perspectives. Now, as I made explicit, the main focus will be on a particular understanding of security, human security. I am going to ask you, so this is your first homework, I think by lecture 4, which will be tomorrow, what your understanding of human security is. Not your understanding of human security based on the readings, but your own conception of what you understand human security to be. I will then introduce you to the different theoretical perspectives on human security. So that will be the focus. Why human security? Well, beginning with the 1994 United Nations Development Programme report, which looked at the different dimensions of human security, there was a concerted attempt at the highest institutional level of the United Nations to change our understanding of security away from the prevalent national security paradigm to look at different dimensions of security, looking at what constitutes security for people. This was adopted eventually by the United Nations General Assembly in 2012 and influences the foreign policy of many states. So it's a basic policy goal of the government of Japan. It was a basic policy goal of the government of Thailand and also of the Liberal government of Canada over a decade ago under Lloyd Axworthy. But more than that, human security constitutes a broadening and deepening of security from the level of the state to the level of everyday people. So that's what makes human security a powerful challenge to our conventional security architecture. Now, we don't have, I will not be going into any great depth of the UN General Assembly resolution, which in September 2012 adopted human security, but any cursory reading of that report, which all of you should be doing this. If not, I can send you the link tomorrow, but all of you should freely be able to download the UN General Assembly resolution on human security. You'll see that it's 2 pages long. So a series of states ratified an understanding of human security, which is 2 pages long and which contains a series of contradictory statements. So human security, as I've basically set out, attempted to challenge the hegemony of the national security paradigm. But ironically, it ends up being adopted by states. So states adopt this. Why do they adopt this? What is the deal in terms of adopting the idea of human security? What has been watered down? What appears contradictory? Why would states freely consent to a limitation of their sovereignty and their ability to define the security, to monopolize understanding of security for people who live within their territory? So the starting point here is to look at the resolution and to compare the resolution with the UNDP human security report and to see what contradictions there are. Now, I'm using contradictions in a very broad sense. A contradiction will just mean something which may not, which contains within it tensions. I'm not using it in a specific Hegelian Marxist tense when we talk in terms of contradictions and having to overcome different contradictions. So anything which appears contradictory just means that there are tensions within it, which mean that it doesn't really make sense. So this is the problem I have when I teach about human security, which is half of the people I talk to about human security will say, yeah, that makes sense, so what? Other people would say, I don't quite get it, it doesn't make sense. So if you say, I don't quite get it, it doesn't make sense, my argument would be, it's because the idea of human security contains contradictions. It's not your fault. Human security should make sense. It's a very simple concept. But if it doesn't make sense, it contains contradictions. Our job as scholars, as research students, is to identify the sources of contradictions. One of the problems which we have seen, and certainly in my own job as director or former director of the Rotary Peace Center at International Christian University, we're the only graduate level Rotary Peace Center in the whole of Asia, and we accept many people from different countries, up to 10 Peace Fellows who are fully funded, who have considerable experience within international institutions or within international non-governmental organizations. And many of them come and take my course and say, wow, I didn't know there was a course on human security, because when I was working in development, when I was working, let's say, for the government of Canada or the government of Japan, and we're looking at official development assistance to Bangladesh or India. I mean, by the way, the Delhi Metro was funded by the government of Japan through the Japan International Cooperation Agency, which is committed to the idea of human security. So human security means you have a subsidized metro system. So it can mean anything to anybody. But getting back to the argument of Peace Fellows, they would come and they'll say, right, we used it, but we didn't know what it meant. And I've done a lot of extensive interviews, particularly within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs within Japan, and also the Japan International Cooperations Agency. And these are interviews which I myself have done, and also those of my students. And many of those people we interviewed had no idea what human security was, but they were committed to it. So I think what's important is we have to ask the question, what is this? And one easy way to think of human security is to think of it as a discourse. All understandings of security are discourses. Now, a discourse doesn't mean it's not part of reality. Of course, it's real. But discourses influence reality. They impact upon reality. They're narratives, stories, which paint a particular picture of reality. People go out, they learn about that discourse, they learn that narrative, and then that influences their action. And I think this is quite important. So as activists, I would implore many activists to basically do the critical work first, to say, before I'm trying to empower people, before I'm trying to free people, what actually am I doing? What are my practices? What am I telling them? And I think this is quite important. So there needs to be more of a dialogue between activists and researchers. This is benefit research and will also benefit activists as well. So I hope this course would be of interest to both academic researchers and activists. Okay, structure. So we've looked at the overview, and I can, let me just finish this PowerPoint slide, and then I will take questions on structure, but most particularly on the overview. So I hope I've given you an understanding of what human security is about. I do have a slide on objectives, course objectives, but we're looking at structure first. Participants, you, will be introduced to conventional understanding of security with reference to the national security paradigm. That will be today. This is the learning outcome for today's lecture. Subsequently, the emergence of non-traditional security threats and human security will be discussed. So tomorrow, the first lecture will introduce you to different conceptions of globalization and to assess its impact upon our understanding of security. So basically, in a historical level, what I'm doing today is bringing you up to date with conventional thinking within security studies, particularly that influenced by the realist theory of international relations. Tomorrow we'll look at the impact of globalization upon our understanding of security, and I'll be introducing you to non-traditional security threats and Then the first lecture on human security, the second lecture tomorrow, will be on different conceptions of human security, and I'd like you to come prepared with your understanding of human security. How would you summarize an understanding of human security within one sentence? I think we have enough time to listen one sentence from all of you. So that will be your first homework. Finally, participants will be introduced to critical security studies and critical perspectives on human security. I should mention, we'll go through the schedule later, but there are two different approaches to human security which I'll be introducing you to: the narrow approach and the broad approach. And this will frame our discussion. So we have one period which will be purely a discussion period. I will not talk, you will talk, but within a designated time period. And I will need to listen to everybody. When we have assessed discussions, it means everybody speaks. Nobody monopolizes our discussion. Nobody monopolizes our understanding of what security is. After this discussion, then I can start to introduce you to some of the work which has influenced me, coming particularly out of critical security studies, which is very critical of human security, and an emerging school on critical human security on which I belong. So most critical security studies scholars, this will be seen as the Welsh School coming out of the University of Aberystwyth, or the Copenhagen School, University of Copenhagen, are very dismissive of human security. They dismiss the concept. However, there have been attempts to apply the insights, particularly of the Welsh School of Human Security, the Welsh School of Security Studies, to understandings of human security. And we'll critically examine this before we conclude, when I will be giving you a lecture which basically re-emphasizes the points which I make in one of the articles which is reproduced within your course outline, on the importance of looking at religion and identity to understandings of security, subjective understandings of security. This is what I term a post-secular approach to human security. Okay, that's the structure in general. That's how the course will be structured and what we will be looking at. In terms of the course objectives, so the first course objective is to introduce participants to theoretical debates on security. So this is the first and most fundamental task which I have, and I hope to be able to complete this by the end of the week. I hope to bring you up to date. Secondly, to outline different and competing approaches to security: national, human, and critical. The focus will be on human security, but human security is one approach amongst many approaches and understandings of security. My job is to introduce you to at least these three. And if I have time, I would also like to introduce you in the lecture on critical security studies to some really interesting work on ontological security, which brings in some of the psychosocial dimensions which Professor Shafiq mentioned in his introductory remarks earlier this morning. So ontological is actually a type of security which can be applied to national security and human security, but it's a critical approach. Thirdly, to get students to research a topic related to the course using empirical examples. We have not yet decided upon the final method of your final examination or course assessment. But one thing which I would expect from all of you, whether it's in assessed discussion or in written papers, would be to bring in empirical examples of your own. These can be from your everyday life. It can be from your research fields. By bringing in examples, you help shed light on the theoretical limitations of security and the theoretical strengths of security. So please bring in these empirical examples. I would like to bring in some empirical examples, but I'm aware that the empirical examples which I want to bring in, most of you cover. So I have a lot to learn from you. I'd rather listen to you talk about particularly empirical examples from South Asia than me talk about it. You know, I may be able to talk about Japan, but I'm not an expert on Japan. I'm more interested and focused on work done within South Asia. So I'm interested in your feedback, but it has to be informed feedback. It has to be related to the course which we're looking at. There needs to be a clear, logical, deductive link between the empirical case study which you deploy and the theoretical statement which you want to make. Okay, the final course objective is to allow participants to present their informed opinions in class. So definitely on Wednesday, I hope, when we have the discussion, all of you will have a chance to speak. Hopefully tomorrow as well, but we have to get through the lecture. So all of you will have a chance to speak, but what you say needs to be limited. So in order to hear from all of you, it may not be possible for you to speak for more than 30 seconds to a minute. But I would like to hear from all of you. But these are informed opinions. If you only have 30 seconds or a minute to play with, then you need to think of what you're going to say in advance. What you're going to say, how you're going to say it, what empirical examples you can bring in to make a particular claim. So there is an interactive dimension, but this interaction takes place within a structure. And I think the structure has been set out. Professor Allen mentioned 3 o'clock we have a break. This will happen every day. I will finish the lecture from 2 to 3. Then you'll have time for interaction and for discussion afterwards. Okay, before I, actually this may not be on. Okay, I don't know if you managed, is this better? If you cannot hear me, then you have to put up your hand because you know, I'm trying not to strain my voice. So if you can't hear me, put up your hand. I've gone through the course objectives. If you have any question on one of the wordings of the course objectives, then you may ask a question. But I'll only give 2 minutes for discussion before I go through the lecture schedule. Any questions on the course objectives? The course objectives should be clear. This is what I am attempting to do through this course. This is what the course is about. So any questions, anything which is unclear or contradictory about the course objectives? Yep. Yeah, the question is to explain the critical approach. My answer would be you have to wait to lecture 7. Then I'll introduce the critical approach. I have a PowerPoint outline. So either I can do all the lectures today, so we do it in 24 hours, it's going to be terrible for my throat, or we can sort of look at it throughout the course. But I did mention my understanding of critical. This is something you should all be thinking about. What does critical mean? Critical does not necessarily mean to reject. So critical also means to reflect. It's a process of reflection. So I think that would be my approach. So critical can be critical security studies, the Copenhagen School, which is securitization theory. But I would like to introduce you to critical perspectives on human security. So that will be the focus. Okay, any other questions on objectives? Okay, if not, what I'll do is I can create 5 minutes at the end or 10 minutes at the end to, 5 minutes at the end to look at questions. So I can ask you anything you don't really understand. Okay, so today, this is the overview. So we'll finish the overview shortly in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Then after the tea break, I'll be introducing you to the national security paradigm. Tomorrow, the first lecture would be on globalization and security. I will be introducing you to non-traditional security threats, but the focus will be on the impact of globalization on security. Lots of empirical questions which we can look at, but I will confine myself to introducing you to theory. You can bring in the empirical examples afterwards. And then after the break, I'll be introducing you to human security. If time permits, I would like to give each of you one sentence. We may not have time, but come prepared. Write down your understanding of human security, not what's based on this, but your understanding. What do you understand by human security? How would you encapsulate it within a sentence? Because this is what needs to be done. I will attempt to do that right afterwards by introducing the lecture to you. Then on Wednesday, Wednesday is arguably the most important day from a conventional perspective, because I will be introducing you to the narrow and broad approach, and immediately afterwards, after the tea, we'll be looking at which approach to security do you find more convincing and why. Now what this means is that you will have homework to do by Tuesday, because it's very difficult for you to arrive at an informed opinion on which approach to security, in this sense when I say security I meant human security, do you find most convincing and why, unless you have already done the work. We could look at national security and human security, but I think what would be better would be to engage with the two different conceptions of human security, which I'm going to outline, the narrow approach and the broad approach. So within a discussion, limited time period, maybe only 1 minute, 30 seconds minimum, 1 minute maximum. So please write this out in advance. This will be assessed. This will be an important part of your assessment. Even if I don't see it, even if you don't send it to me, please prepare for this within the time period of 30 seconds to 1 minute. Then afterwards, I can introduce you to critical security studies and attempt to explain more about the question which Akhtar asked. What do we understand by critical? I think this is a huge part of the lecture. What constitutes being critical? And I would like to introduce you to critical perspectives on human security, which talks to the work which I did right at the beginning when I started engaging with human security along with Mustafa Kemal Pasha 10 years ago. And then finally, on the final day, I will be introducing to you the contribution which I hope I have made to human security, a post-secular approach to human security, which is really informed by my engagement with South Asia and also with Europe. So I think within Japan, within Canada, within the United States to a lesser extent, although they're not interested in human security, they have very secular understandings of what human security is, very secular assumptions of what it is to be human. I know from the little work I've done on South Asia that it's impossible to conceive of any understanding of security, of democracy, of human rights, which does not take into account the importance of identity and religion, which intends to minimize that. So the approach I'll try to make is that perhaps we should take this into account. This does not mean accepting the views of those who think that they are the gatekeepers of religion, who attempt to define religion in a particular view. But at the same time, we should look at the importance of culture as a form of identity. And many people living in homogeneous nation states. I can give you examples of Italy and Germany. Italy I know well because my mother's from there, but Germany also. Germany now has 15% of its population is foreign born. If we look at France, which is a republic, France is different from Italy and Germany. But France is a society where almost 10%, 5 to 10% of the population are Muslim. So what does this mean for French national identity? If we look at French national identity, it's very secular. But if we look at Italian and German national identity, it's based on the idea of homogeneity. People are Italian, people are German, and there's a privileged position there for Christianity. So what does it mean having migrants coming into your society from different parts of the world with different cultural perspectives? So basically, what Europe is doing, what Europe should be doing, is looking at South Asia, learning from its practices on accommodating difference, also learning from its mistakes. But I would like to sort of change the focus of when we look at human security, rather than always looking at the advanced countries. We should perhaps be looking at what so-called developing countries do, particularly in terms of living with diversity. Very last point, I don't want to go on about this, but when you look at the UNDP Human Development Reports, what countries always come top? Huh? Scandinavian countries, yeah, excellent. I was having dinner last week with a couple of Norwegians. Great, wonderful education system, great scholarships, great healthcare, no people. Sorry, but the entire population of Scandinavia is less than the population, I would say, of Tokyo or of Delhi. So I don't see the point of always looking at Scandinavian countries and saying, oh, these are ideal countries. Lots of natural resources, very few people. So within that scenario, you can have high development goals. But it's far more difficult, as Professor Pasha was mentioning today, for a developing country like Cuba to have a universal health service. To achieve human security goals within a developing context is far more of a challenge. And perhaps we should be looking at the practices of so-called developing nations rather than looking at the developed West. Okay. Finally, I should mention that on the very last lecture, this will be on human security in South Asia, but I'm aware that all of you, or most of you, know more than me about South Asia. So rather than me giving you a lecture in South Asia, we could have this as a discussion, but I've also asked one of my former master's students, who's now working as a journalist for India Express, to come up, and she's very kindly agreed to perhaps give a talk on her thesis research on human security in Muzaffarnagar. So I will, if she can't make it, then I will give the lecture, but it will be interactive. But this will be the only empirical case study, and I hope it will be of interest to all of you. All of you will be able to come in, and we could even make it an interactive discussion instead. Okay, I think time is up. I would mention that although we have most of the readings are contained within this course handout, most of my understanding of security is within the following book, Religion, Identity, and Human Security. Unfortunately, I don't own the copyright to this because this was published by Routledge, and they're a huge multinational corporation, and I don't have copyright. But I will donate a copy, I hope, to the university, and I hope the universities where you go to, I hope you would recommend that they buy this book. And I can, in turn, make some articles freely available. So I also have an academia webpage, and on that, I've written some articles, including this article on human security, and made that freely available. So if you follow me on academia.edu, you will not be violating copyright, and you will be able to understand a lot of the articles. But I think, as please ask your institutions where you are to see if they can purchase a copy of this. You don't have to do it yourself. It's relatively inexpensive for the UK, so it's paperback. But this, if you want a fuller understanding of the course, then please look at this book. Okay, I think it's time for a break now. So shall we have a break, and then I can take questions? Actually, we have 5 minutes. Excellent. So 5 minutes for questions, and then we'll have a break, and afterwards I will introduce you to national security. Yep.
Okay, I read this chapter, and one thing which came to my head, I'm not really familiar with human security and all that. One thing which I really want to know is, do we get to study the feminist perspective of human security? And also, another thing is that, do we have a right-based approach? Because I'm working on disability rights. So, is it kind of included in the format of security itself? Because we being humans, and especially the disabled people, for them the idea of security would be a little different from our gender understanding of the term. So do we get to study that as well? Both the feminist perspective and the rights-based approach to it?
Oh, okay, it's very simple answer to it. Firstly, gender security is a huge part of critical security studies, but rather than me giving a lecture on this, this is something which you can all bring in. So the second point is our understanding of security. Security is what we make it. So it's not me introducing you to every single different understanding of security. But if there are erasures, then it's up to you to bring it in. Sorry?
Is it open for discussion? Can we include in lectures, like discussion?
Yeah, but I mean, there's a limit. I've prepared the lectures in advance, so I cannot, it's not like, I was going to say fast food company, but a multinational store. I can't, there's something, okay, there's an excellent reading on a gender critique of human security by a colleague of mine at London School of Economics, Dr. Maria. I have this. I don't have permission to circulate it. But if you, one thing I should mention is please make a note. Oh my God, I haven't even included it. I've included it in the next slide. I'll see if I can include it here. So please make a note of my email address. My email's not working today, but hopefully by tomorrow it'll be working, and I can perhaps, I can't send you a link, but I can send you references to this. So what I'm not doing is saying this is security, this is all there is, but it's a way of how you bring it in. So we will find ways in which you can bring it in the course. What I could do is, for the final discussion, we could say, what other form of security needs to be taken into account? See, my problem with this is that, for me, human security is a universal concept. So all of this is a form of human security. Even if we look at gender-based security, it's still human security. What the feminist critique of human security points to is the fact that human security isn't universal. that human security excludes women. So I think there's a difference between, within feminist thought, between rejections of human security and a critique of patriarchy. Now, critiquing patriarchy doesn't mean necessarily critiquing human security. But I think this is something we can bring in later in the course. Okay, one more minute. Okay, just before we break, what I will need from all of you have written your names and registered. And if you could include your email addresses as well, that would help. I may be able to send a link maybe to all of you once I have all your email addresses. Apologies if not. But it's important for me to have your email addresses. And perhaps what we can start with, I'm not sure after the break, perhaps tomorrow at some point, it would be nice to know a bit about yourself. So I'd like you to succinctly be able to reintroduce yourself. Once again, we had introductions in the morning, but not everybody was here. But I need a sort of a list. So first, the list will be provided for me maybe tomorrow. And if you include your email address, and then I can identify who you are, that will certainly help with the interactive discussion. So perhaps, hopefully by the second lecture tomorrow, human security, I'll have a list of everybody there. Anyway, it's time for a break. So
okay,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Structural realist would argue that states should seek enough power to ensure security. They should never try and maximize power because that may lead to over-expansion. So over-expansion would lead to balancing of power. Arguably, this is what happened to the United States. The United States thought under President Bush, George W. Bush, that it could fight a war on two fronts at the same time. Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, realists would say no. Defensive realists would say no. That's never been done. Hitler tried that, failed. Napoleon tried that, failed. You cannot fight a war on two fronts. It leads to overexpansion. And overexpansion also leads to overextension. The costs of expansion exceeds the benefits. Okay, occupation of Iraq, and then you have a financial crisis in 2007, 2008. They may not be directly linked, but this is an example of overextension. The classic example is the Soviet Union, the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, a 10-year war, and this leads to the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. So returning to the question, which you may see again, which approach the security dilemma should India pursue in relation to its neighbors in South Asia and beyond? And a subsidiary question, what are the costs and benefits of each approach to ensuring India's national security? So the second question allows you to think about the first question. So you don't need to tell me your answers right now to the second question. We don't have enough time. But I want you to understand the difference between offensive and defensive realism as a way of pursuing national security. Any questions first of clarification about the questions? Oops. Okay, if there are no questions, then This is your discussion time. So we have 15 minutes? 15 minutes. So please state your name, and I would like a balance between offensive and defensive realists. For the sake of argument, today you're all realists. You can't object to it. You're representing India. India is a state. So you have to think of it from the perspective of India's national interest. You can't critique India's national interest today. Yep. Yeah, please go ahead.
Defensive realism in case of India. Firstly, because going about the points under offensive realism, in terms of maximization of power or creating a hegemony, I think a very important element is resources or infrastructure, which I think is not quite the way it is for India right now. So I would agree with the points under defensive realism.
Thank you. So your name is Priya again? Prita. Yeah. Who would agree with Prita? Who would agree with Prita on defensive realism? Okay. Go ahead.
Even I think the offensive realism is a thing India is not doing. India is not at a position to go for offensive realism. So I would go for it.
Yeah, but that's not. The idea is, okay, India may not be in a position, but what works? What happens if India was in a position?
If India,
No, go ahead. No.
actually it's not about if it will or it was. So what I think is it should not.
Good.
When I go with defensive,
Yeah.
I also, in case of India, I think defensive realism is the right thing. Because it's, at this point of time, India is not in a position, I think, because of its economic requirements and because of its
Sorry, could you firstly tell me your name?
circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, the point I made earlier is it's not really about whether India is ready for defensive realism or offensive realism. It's which one will work better for India's national security, even if it was in a position to do both.
Still, I would say defensive.
Okay, yeah. So,
I believe,
could you say your name again?
my name is Giorgio. I believe that India, the current state of the law order is key. Considering that India should go for the defensive realism to the extent of defending itself from the security perspective. And to that, they should keep in mind, they should maximize power, keeping in mind non-proliferation of armaments and militarization, and to the extent that it only uses power to extend power, maximize power for its own security, for defensive security, not offensive security. That is what I think India should go for.
Okay, Akhtar, thank you.
Basically, I'd be on the side of defensive realism. For the reason we are primarily the victims of offensive realism if adopted by India. So the thing is offensive realism will put entire regional security at stake as the first point, as far as South Asia is concerned. And we have also seen that it has hampered the economic progress of the entire region. It has
India should try to become a hegemon, particularly a regional hegemon, as it is this presently in this trying to be a hegemon in the region, particularly in Afghanistan, which is fighting with soft war is going on between India and Pakistan over this control of Afghanistan, who will be in the better position here. So India can be a hegemon, because it is not necessary that India will conquer other territories, but it should definitely try to be a hegemon in its own, like it is having, because it's having a larger net of this population in the region. It should try to be hegemon, why not? But hegemon is not necessarily conquering the state. It will not conquer this any other state, but it can be a hegemon.
Thank you.
I agree with him. We do not have to actually follow a complete black or white path. You can always look for little gray sides into it. So, with the first 2 points in the defensive realism, I think India should go with it. But when it comes to over-expansion, and I think why not to expand? Why don't you just curb yourself just thinking of others? They might attack and we might not able to defend ourselves. I think expansion should be, you should constantly keep expanding yourselves. Stagnation, I think, is there. You stagnate somewhere.
Yeah, we can come back to this later, but I would like to hear from more people who haven't spoken. We have 6 minutes left, so yeah.
Hi, sir. My name is Shani. I'm from Peace and Congress. Considering these 3 points and humorously, India should go for the offensive realism strategy. Because India has all potential to maximize its power in the region. Particularly, you are in the position of, considering its relation to neighbors and in South Asia and Europe. And by the way, India has already perceived as a hegemon by most of its neighbors already. And considering the point of bandwagoning, the chances of bandwagoning is much higher in this region, since India is the only, except Afghanistan, all other South Asian states have geographical boundary shared with India. There is almost some 70% of South Asia is India. Geographically, and consider the economic power, India has all potential to maximize its power, and it is already like said, Pakistan for that matter. India is a kind of have a cultural hegemonic position, and the only difference here is Pakistan is a nuclear power, as in. Otherwise, India has all potential and India has all chances to follow offensive realism in South Asia.
Okay, thank you.
India,
Yeah.
in the faculty in the Department of Political Science, I agree with him because there's a point that if there is a power vacuum, that is kind of considered dangerous. And in South Asia, if there's a power vacuum, India has, India is facing the threat from China, and China is more likely to take over that, fill that vacuum. So in order to restrict or constrict that advances from China, then again, I believe India should go for offensive realism, as what he said.
Good.
Just to curtail that power vacuum, fill in that power vacuum, and restrict that.
Thank you very much. Good. Yeah, we have a debate now. Good. Yeah.
I am supporting the offensive realism because in these problems we are all we need much more power to be able to grow and expand our knowledge. Then we can get more opportunities in the case of settlement from the China. Everything is exporting their expanding to the organization to their trade, not in
maximizing the power. But on the other side, defensive is giving the enough power to contradict the situation when war is happening, enough power to balance our military sources, and then we can have other chances to invest in other sectors like resource or economy and all. So I would like to go with the defensive one.
Okay, in this thing, the similar point that you pointed out, the thing is, how do you measure that enough power? What is the unit of measuring that, if it is enough or not?
It should be able to defend.
Pardon?
It should be able to defend.
Yeah, for that matter, what is the number of military, how much, how do you quantify that?
Okay, let's bring in.
I mean, it should be in a viable position to exercise its own feasibility, to use that thing which is which it should have it in its repository. I mean, here power cannot be quantified. I mean, but they're saying enough power to defend something. I mean, to ensure
But
security.
I am in a country where I want to protect myself. I won't ever agree to my military being enough. I will keep saying that I want to protect myself and I want to expand my military.
Okay,
Yes.
just one second. Okay, just one second. Okay, there's one rule which we have in this class, which is following the realists, we can never use the word country again. If we use the term country, then we're buying into the realist worldview, and you can never critique realism. So if you use country, it's no longer hegemony, it's no longer dominance, it's just common sense, so it's naturalized. So please either use the word state, or if you use the word country, that's fine, but you're a realist. Okay, could any, yes, go ahead.
I should be able to exercise at my call. And that statement itself says that states should seek enough power to ensure security. Hegemony, I mean, we already explained in this previous topic. It consists of that that element of coercion as well. Coercion, and we are talking of regional stability. It does not go hand in hand with that basic. To become a regional, establish regional progress need not be a hegemon. You can follow the other route as well.
I agree, but as Bhutan said, when you say offensive realism, you have to, just like she said, you have to keep in mind that we have a neighbor called China as well. So you cannot always think of the smaller states around you and think, okay, we have to be in a soft power form and not be that aggressive.
Let me put a point in to my colleague Shani. She is like in support of power maximization, while I'm in support of security maximization.
What is the
But
difference?
power maximization is like what Mayor Shema says, offensive realism. It's like you have to maximize power only. And security maximization is what Wallace says, that enough power to ensure security. No, security. I'll put the point again. So the thing is like, what this power maximization leads to security dilemma. Because you'll be taking a step, and I, in terms of dilemma, will be taking the next step. And it becomes a cycle, never-ending cycle. So it's then difficult to come out of this cycle. This is what is being predicted about India and China relations. That this relation has gone into the phase of security dilemma. Nobody trusts anybody now. Everybody takes the next step. So in terms of it, like security is like, yes, there should be a trust that they have worked for the kind of self-defense only, and they have no intentions of belligerence in this security maximization. That's it. So better like go for security maximization, but power maximization is like little bit.
Security maximization will lead to power maximization because the countries will anticipate that you are trying to defend themselves. The countries will anticipate that you are trying to defend themselves against the other countries, or you're up to something. That kind of an anticipation will be there.
Something which will be done under
Exactly.
You cannot always expect this trust factor from each other, It's, as it is said, it's a constant conflictual state. You cannot just think, okay, I want, expand my power, thinking like, okay, it's an understanding between the two of us, I won't expand, so you won't expand. It's not like that, It's not corroborated kind of a thing.
the option out of it.
No, either black or white part is follow grey part and balance in the middle, is it?
So we will be always like minding kind of a defense perspective of the state, like rather than getting into the human security paradigm. And so will be like
Developmental perspective.
developmental perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, this
We
is.
always like maximize power of your state.
So we only have 2 minutes, so if anybody from outside who hasn't spoken, if they would like to intervene within this debate.
Yes, I outrightly reject that offensive realism because I think this is another name of imperialism. And in this world, means if you just when your intention is power maximization, nobody is going to accept, and it will only lead to conflict and tensions. And it is not only harmful for India; it is harmful for entire human civilization. That is what.
Sorry, if you could tell us your name, so we can.
Minarul Islam source.
Okay. You've spoken. Okay, but the idea is to let those outside. I know it's realism, so you just want to maintain power amongst yourselves, but those on the periphery who would like to intervene within this debate. So anyone we have not heard of? Yeah, please. In front of. Put on the mic, please.
I would like to go with the defensive realism because it practice is more for cooperation more as compared with the offensive realism that brings in lots of conflict in South Asia already has. So that's my question.
Yep.
So I will go with the offensive realism. So because just as we look at the history of our country, we will find out that India has 3 wars with Pakistan, 1 with China. This is just because India is always defensive in nature. Always defensive in nature. If India would be offensive in nature, there should be something good along with this nation.
But is it negotiation or
Anyone else from outside? Because we only have 1 minute left. Yeah. Yep, please. So, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think my name is Jahan Shah Safari. I'm from Iran, University in English Department. Actually, sir, I think it should be discussed with some, other factors like the role of big powers. So today, the definition of neighbors is different. So we can say even USA is neighbor of, India. It's not just like geographical, borders that we have. So we should think about what they want, what the powers they are monitoring, and what they want this country to have. This country should be a hegemonic country power, or what you say, offensive realism, or non-defensive. So I think it should be, also.
I think the state starts off with defensive realism that they want to maximize security, but it lands up with offensive realism. Like it's went on to the security, it's being used to power maximization.
Anybody else? Do we have 1 minute? No, you've had your turn. You're not subaltern. Anybody else? Okay, last word. What did you say? I didn't understand.
Basically, he's saying if you go for offensive realism, defensive realism is a part of it automatically. It becomes a part of it. Like you become, you have that power enough to support yourself, and then you can depend also on offend others also.
But you are defensive enough, so you don't need to be offensive. You are defensive enough, so you don't need to be offensive. Your problem is not. You are defensive enough, then you don't need to be offensive.
Yeah, I think I would like to bring this lively session to a conclusion. But I would say that, whenever I ask this question in Japan, people in Japan want to say both. And I try and make the question so people cannot say both. So if you look at, I want to go both for offensive and defensive realism, great, it means you're a realist. But at the same time, there are different policy choices. So if we look at Waltz and the defensive realists, they were very, very worried about George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq. And many defensive realists wrote a letter very critical of Bush's decision. Interestingly, many liberal internationals supported it for different reasons. So I think when we look at offensive and defensive realists, there are different policy choices. So I don't think it's possible to say both, because there is a policy choice. At the level of realism, you're dealing with the state. So does India intervene? Let's say if you look in the 1980s in the Sri Lankan civil war, India did intervene, and arguably were the costs associated with it more than the benefits. Well, for Rajiv Gandhi, the costs did not were not more than the costs were far more severe than the benefits. So we're talking about policy. But I think tomorrow we'll shift towards human security, and human security means we're not looking at the level of the state. So we'll be critiquing a lot of the realist assumptions we've learned today. Sorry, did you want to say something?
So at this point, what do you think India should go for?
What?
What do you think India should go for?
I cannot say, but I would say one thing: I'm not a realist. So.
So again, I think this concludes the day one. I think it's a great day, wonderful day. As it is said, like well begun is more than half begun. Okay. So thank you, Professor Shani, and I think thanks for the very vibrant and robust debate that we have got between offensive and defensive. So I hope that this kind of culture that we should continue in the days ahead. Okay.
Yep.
So thank you very much. So tomorrow we'll have some announcements. So again, please be here by 1:30, 1:40 around that. Okay. There will be some announcements for 15-20 minutes, and again 2 o'clock sharp. We'll start the lectures, same format, same things, okay? Thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
Yep. Thank you.